Hey everybody, if you remember a little while ago I did one of my basic explanation videos on motorcycle forks, particularly like how they go together, what all the parts do and things like that. Because I do these videos as a basics video, I don't go into huge detail. Like in that video I didn't feel the need to go into great depth on compression or rebound. And someone mentioned, in a slightly sarky comment, oh, I see nothing about compression and rebound, and it's like, well, no, because it's not really necessary for what this video's intention was. So let's do another basics video on compression and rebound. Now, I'm going to say, I'll be clear here, this is a huge subject, and some experts can go on for tens of hours about it. But there are just some basics that you need to know, just so you know when someone's having a conversation, at least you know what they're talking about. I'm also going to do some little experiments at the end with a miniature shock and changing some things to show what the difference is. But first, let me show you it on the bike, because there's kind of a couple of different types. So on my XJ6, you can see the top of the suspension is just a cap. There is nothing on there that you can change, and that's because this suspension is set in place. It's just, its compression and rebound is what it is. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute back at the bench with the internals of one of these. On my DR, hopefully you can see there it says comp S&H, that means compression, soft and hard, and there is a similar one on the bottom of the fork that I can't really, well, let me try and do it. Don't say I don't try for you. There you go, you can see there's a screw in there. That, as you can see it says on the side here, is for the rebound, and that's again soft and hard. That's because the suspension on this DR, other than being upside down, opposed to conventional, and I think I even have a video on that, is designed to be more tunable for performance riding. The fact that these bikes can be used kind of off-road, on-road, and you do need to tune the suspension on something this light. Well, you do on everything, to be fair. Okay, so on a standard set of non-adjustable forks, now I must just say here, this is not the right stanchion for this, because this is actually off my other bike, because the stanchions for this bike are off getting re-chromed. But it essentially is the same, that this rod lives inside this tube, okay? And there is a seal around here that stops any oil getting in between. So this is bolted to the base of this part here. This sits here and is bolted in here. So this does not move. So this does this together. Okay. This is sealed around here and there is oil inside. Now, as it goes up and down, oil can escape in and out of these holes. And because of the size of the holes and the viscosity of the oil, it will dampen correctly for this bike in the way that Honda's decided is correct. There is no valve system or anything in this, it's just very basic. The reason you have a spring here is because normally this is blocked off and you can only put this tube in from the other end all the way through. As I say, this is blocked off the seal. If your suspension comes to the top, because say your front wheel leaves the floor, it doesn't slam into each other. There's a spring to allow it to take a little bit of that there, and there'll be a stop on the other end, normally to stop it having a hard whack. It's a bit of rubber or something to slow it down. But the point simply is that the damping and compression is done by restricting the flow of an oil through the system. I'm going to explain this with a rear shock because it should make it easier to understand, I think. If you can imagine that there was no damping or slowing down of the rate that this spring can collapse under weight from going down the road, if it was just the spring, it'd be like a pogo stick and it would bounce. And that is exactly what happens when someone's dampers go in their car, for instance. You'll notice the back end of the car can start doing this little rhythmical bounce. So compression rebound is slowing down the rate of this spring. You choose the size or the weight of the spring that you have on it, depending on the size of the machine it's on and the size of the rider and things like that. And that is known as sag. You sit on the bike, they measure a height between two parts and go, okay, it needs to be this much further up or lower down to the ground. And it means that basically your middle point is correct. And that's what these adjuster rings here are for. This is normally clamped in place here. These adjuster rings put tension on the spring. It's the preload of the spring. And that is how you set that. If you're going to take a pillion, so you've got a lot of extra weight on the back, you quite often want to crank that down more, so the spring is harder to compress. So this works the same for the front and the rear. The compression is the control of the speed that the spring can collapse, and the rebound is the speed of which it can come back. And you have two independent ways of controlling those two things. Now on the DR, you've actually got four because you have high and low speed, which I'll get into in a minute, but we're going to stick to the simples of compression. So you could set it so it would compress really, really, really quickly, like whoop, but then it its rebound will be super slow. So the second you hit a bump, it's just going to hit to the ground and then slowly come back up. Obviously, you don't want that in suspension. You know what you want is a nice, even compression and rebound to give you a smoother ride. You know, if you see like a wheel going over a suspension course and it's doing particularly well, the wheel is going crazy like this, but when you look at the car above it, it's perfectly smooth. It's because the compression and the rebound rate are right. You don't want to make it too stiff, because if you go into a corner and it's really, really stiff, your suspension's not going to take up any of that extra weight of you going around the corner, and it's going to put more pressure on the tyre. When you go in a corner, the bike sits down, and it helps add the weight onto the tyre slowly. I think that's probably the best way to explain it. And it also will take any undulations of the road out. If it's too hard, it's not going to be able to adjust fast enough, and you're more likely going to put like a pressure spike on the tyre, and it's going to lose grip and go. Maybe go and then catch, maybe go and be gone. But as you can see, you don't want it to be rock solid. And also for over bumps and things, you're just going to get annihilated without any suspension. Equally, if it's too soft and you turn into a corner really hard, as you come into that corner and you transfer the weight down to the rear, maybe as you get the throttle on, it's going to slam into it, and that extra force could sort of hammer the back end of the bike round. And that's why you want this compression and rebound to be even and set right for the conditions that you're going on. If you're on a very, very smooth racetrack, you're probably going to have a very stiff set of suspension, and classically, you see that as Top Gear talked about how a car set up for the Nürburgring wasn't great for real roads, because roads are not like the Nürburgring. Basically, track suspension is very firm because they don't have to deal with a lot of undulations. Off-road suspension, as you know, is very, very soft and has more movement in it. That's another thing. And that's one of the reasons that this has got a gas reservoir on it, is because, and I'll get into that as well with the rear shock. When you have off-road suspension, you need more movement to take out that energy. So, if a lot of force comes up because of a big hole or something, if you've only got this much movement, it's going to have to be very solid amount of resistance, or it's going to whack, and then that can feel like a solid hit anyway. If you've got a lot of travel and it's soft, it can really take that over time, and then obviously you don't feel the impacts. Like if you're in a car crash and you rolled it 8 times, as long as you don't hit anything solidly, you're better off than just hitting a wall, because the G-forces are so much less, and all that energy from the 80 miles an hour and the weight of your car has to go somewhere. If it's taken out slowly, you don't get so much of it. If it's taken out very quickly, you're probably taken out as well. And I think you can work out from what I've said already that the rebound is the exact same thing, but it's how quickly it can re-extend after taking a bump. So that is the basics of compression and rebound on standard bikes and ones that you can just adjust those two things. The rear shock on my DR, and this is a spare one, is a bit different because it has high and low speed on it on the top. So this does the compression damping. You adjust the outer nut for slow speed and the inner for high. Now what that means is if you're it's kind of like a butterfly valve exhaust. If you don't need a lot from the car, it won't open the exhaust, but if you do go for a lot, it opens it up to allow it to flow. It basically gives you 2 rates of which it reacts, that adjust depending on the pressure that goes onto it. So if it's a slow bump, it will just use the lower rate, but if it's you get a real hard hit, it will use the higher rate and allow it to adjust faster. But if you'd had it at that high rate all the time, it would be overly squidgy. So it's kind of like a first and second gear. And the way you do that on the front suspension anyway, as I mentioned, it's got top and bottom adjusters, is there's basically 2 valves, which are one-way valves that oppose each other. One allows fluid to go one way, one allows fluid to go the other way, and that's how you individually adjust the compression and the rebound. Now, as I mentioned, you have a spring in each fork. The only difference between this is that the coil is on the outside, not on the inside, and you have the damper rod inside that adjusts. And you want those to both be even on both sides. Except, and I still don't believe this is a thing, if you watch Jake the Garden Snake's recent video about upgrading his suspension on his 300L, you'll see the fact that Honda is going with a set of suspension that one side has got a spring and the other side's got a damper. I do not understand how that is not ruining bearings. I mean, in Suzuki's book, when you set up the suspension, it makes a point of saying make sure the settings are exactly the same on both sides, because it can cause instability and, odd wear on the bike. That literally isn't even. It has nothing to do with each other. The lateral differences, like, torsion, is that torsionally? I don't get how that works, but hey, go and watch Jake's video and you can see. But he'll also show you one of the valve stacks being taken apart because he had to revalve it, which is basically a load of shims or washers in a stack that make up the valve. As I say, they're two one-way valves that oppose each other. So when it's under compression, one acts on it, and when it's under when it's rebounding, the other one will act, and that slowing down of the fluid through that valve, because it is adjustable, adjusts the speed of the compression and rebound. Now, as I say, this is a much deeper subject, and how you actually apply this to your bike and how you set it up for yourself is a very complicated subject to do with what you're doing, how much do you weigh, the bike itself, the tyres, the type of suspension, a million different factors. For most of you, if you've got a bike that you can do this much adjustment on, you're going to know about this anyway. But they are putting adjusters onto 125s and things, like the old Lexmoto Adrenaline, that they don't sell anymore. It's the saddest story ever. It was a great bike. That had adjusters on it. And obviously, if you set them up wrong, you're going to ruin the handling of your bike. It is a huge game-changing thing with a bike, decent suspension setup, and yet most people don't even look into it. I mean, I'll be honest with you, on my DR, all I've done is made sure the sag was about right, and I've had some mild adjustments on the suspension, but then when I sent them off and had it come back, they put them to stock, and I'm like, yeah, I think this is fine as it is. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly talk about this before I go on to my practical explanation that should make everything I've said so far make more sense. This part here is a gas reservoir. Some shocks have this, particularly if they're a long stroke, where when this rod and the piston inside goes up inside it, the oil in there has to go somewhere. So it transfers over into this canister. In this canister is a bladder filled with nitrogen gas, 175 psi on this bike, and basically that air gap at the top, I should have talked about air gaps, yeah, we will get to that. That air gap at the top is going to affect the rate of this spring working. Now, if obviously there's no pressure there, it's going to be a lot more floppy. If it's overpressured, it's going to be really hard. But yeah, it's a way of tuning even further. Right, air gap, I'll quickly talk about that. In your forks, you have an amount of oil that you have to fill it up to, which the damper rods use. Above that is what's called the air gap. Now, if you were to put more oil in and fill that air gap up, there is nothing left, and it will actually make the suspension an awful lot harder, because that air will compress with pressure in the fork, and that will add to the suspension's action. So that's why when you fill your forks, you put an amount of oil in them that you specified to use, but then you also check the air gap and also check that it's even on both. You can make your suspension slightly firmer by adding a little bit of extra fluid to it, but you shouldn't really do that. You should just change the viscosity of it, the weight of the oil, so when it goes through all those holes, it takes just a little bit longer if it's thicker. And now, hopefully, I will show you a demonstration of all of this, and you'll just go, yeah, makes perfect sense. Radio-controlled car has oil-filled coil-over type suspension, so I can take one of these apart and show you the difference. So if we show compression, compression is the speed that I compress this in, that resists, and the rebound is how quickly it comes back out. So if I do this and let go, I can get my thumb out of the way. Yeah? That's the same on both sides. So what I'm going to do is just take this off. As you can see in the cap here, it's got a little blue silicone bubble, and that's obviously acting as a little bit of a sort of an air area, an air gap in this. God, that oil looks horrible. Oh God, it's like treacle. I guess I should mention how this is working. Inside here is just a little sealed piston, just a little piece of plastic, and in that piece of plastic is a hole. Now, depending on the size of that hole, and the viscosity of the liquid, depends on the speed in which you can go backwards and forwards. Like this sort of suspension tube, it does it the same both ways. No valves. See, playing with things like this as a kid, which is like a real type of suspension, taught me so much about how things work and really inspired me to do the things I'm doing now. So people, the hobby of using... Did that hit the camera? Oh, it did. Okay, so I'm going to put this one back together exactly as it was with no oil in it. So it's just going to be air. I'm going to pop this back on. So with oil, I can easily get my finger out of the way in time. Without oil, I can't. It just stays attached to my thumb, because if I let go of it, if I do it on this side, compression, rebound. What if I use WD-40? That's really thin. It will slow it down, but it won't be much different. Okay, so let's try it. The original oil side. WD-40 side. That really has not done a lot at all. Okay, let's try to find something thicker. This is what happened earlier on. If I just press this, let it suck it up, and then let go, this is the rebound controlling the fluid. You see it squirt out that little hole. I've got some real motorcycle fork oil here. Should we try that out? Okay, fill to the brim. If at first you don't succeed, fuck it. No, I can kind of almost get my finger out of the way first. It's nowhere is springy. This is real silicone shock oil for this sort of thing. So I'm not reusing this. Have a look at that. Okay, I get the viscosity of that. Let's try this. Oh, this is really goopy and gloopy. Right, let's try that out. Which side was it? This one. I guess I'll have to refill all 4 of them with the same stuff if I actually want to use this car again. To be honest with you, I'm not going to. As you can see, I put a camera mount on it when I had a drift, before it was stabilised. And, oh man, I'd so wish I had a decent radar control car now for, like, putting the 360 camera on. And I have looked into the costs of getting one that was, like, good enough, and it was, like, 300-400 quid, and I'm like, never can justify that for a few fun little videos of putting, like, a 360 camera on a RC car. I did contact a few companies in the past and was like, hey, would you fancy, you know, working with me? I'll do a review on one and give you, like, a link for a while to make it, as I'm not an RC channel, like, you know, I'm sure it'll get some other people inspired to try this stuff out because it's fun. And I didn't get a single response. So, that's fine. It's understandable. I think this one will be very different. So, standard side. New side. God, these are even slower. Can't tell. I'll tell you what, that feels so much better though, the compression. It doesn't seem to... I tell you why. This new stuff is designed to not foam. Because obviously you don't want your oils to foam, because then you get basically air going through it rather than oil. And it takes up space and stuff. It's not good. You don't want that happening in your oil, of your shocks. When I took the other one apart, I noticed it was full of foam. This obviously, I don't know if it's cavitating that's causing this, but I think it is. It is foaming up, and that's making it a little quicker than this side. Now. But anyway, I really hope that that demonstration with that put a lot of what I was trying to explain at the beginning of this video into action for you to physically see and see what difference it makes and how, you know, compression and rebound works. The only difference is, as I say, with separate systems, is you can control the speed that it can focus. You can control the speed that it both compresses and rebounds independently. But on a standard bike without that, it's preset. Just like this, with the size of a hole and the weight of the fluid. There you go. I hope you found this video interesting or useful. If you did, please smack that like button. This will be part of my mechanical explanations playlist, which you can find linked at the end. And also go to my channel, look at the playlist. There's all sorts of stuff like this. This is very different from my motorcycle content. If you haven't seen my channel, I actually generally do motorcycle content reviews and things like that, working with manufacturers around the world, well, around the country. I say manufacturers from around the world. So please check it out. If you want to help support this channel, please consider doing that through Patreon. I would very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Also, I kept away from all of the puns of suspension the best I could. At least give me a like for that. It really put a spring in my step.